Hi, I'm going to tell you the story of what happened to me when my stepfather insulted me on an unforgettable trip. I won a college trip and my stepfather went with me. He took off my little seal that protected my purity, and that's how it happened. My name is Natalie and I'm 20 years old. Until recently, I lived with my mother, just the two of us, and our life was calm and routine. But everything changed when my mother met Jake, and after some time they decided to get married. It was a big change for me. Suddenly, we were moving to his house, and I was learning to adapt to this new family dynamic. In the meantime, I continued to focus on my public college of pedagogy, something I'm really passionate about. I've always dedicated myself a lot to my studies, participating in projects and work that were important for my professional development. Recently, after handing in one of the most challenging papers I've ever done, I received news that would change the course of my days. I won a trip to Paris as a reward for my effort and academic performance. This is where the story I'm about to tell you begins, an unexpected trip full of promise of adventure and self-discovery. Paris, with its mysteries and urban landscapes, became the perfect setting for the next chapter of my life. Little did I know that this experience would bring so many twists and turns and encounters that would change the way I see the world even more. Everything seemed beautiful. The college had paid for all the costs of the trip and, for a moment, I felt fulfilled, as if I was about to embark on a unique and transformative adventure. However, I was soon overcome by an anxiety that I couldn't ignore. The fear of going alone, the idea of being in a country where I didn't know anyone, with no one to turn to if something went wrong, made me nervous. I could hardly imagine what it would be like to be lost in a strange place without my mother or anyone close to me by my side. I explained my concerns to my mother, but unfortunately, she couldn't accompany me. She had just returned from vacation and, with her demanding job, she wouldn't be able to take any more days off to travel with me. As much as I tried not to think about it, sadness began to weigh on me, like a shadow that threatened to transform the dream trip into a source of anguish. While I was dealing with these feelings, my mother and stepfather Jake were thinking of a solution without me knowing. They had already been discussing the possibility of him accompanying me. They were just waiting to confirm that everything was okay to tell me. Then came the great news. Jake had managed to get a vacation and accepted the invitation to accompany me. The moment my mother told me, I felt immense relief and excitement took over me. Now, I could really enjoy the trip knowing that I would have someone I could trust by my side. When the day finally arrived, we boarded the plane, just me and my stepfather, heading to Paris. On the plane, between the expectations and the aerial views, I began to feel that this trip would be much more important than I could have imagined. When we arrived, we checked in and began our vacation, ready to experience every moment that this new city had to offer. We had agreed to stay in Paris for a week, so we decided to make the most of every second. From the first day, we began to explore everything we could, the most famous tourist attractions, as well as several traditional restaurants and cafes. The city was magical, and every corner revealed a new experience. I felt overflowing with happiness and excitement, as if I were living in a dream. Interestingly, this trip also gave me a new perspective on Jake. He and my mother had been married for a little over a year, but until then our contact had been quite limited. In the rush of routine, I was almost always busy with college, and he was with work. We only talked about the basics on a daily basis and didn't have much contact. But there, far from home and the distractions of everyday life, something changed. For the first time, I had the opportunity to really get to know Jake. We started talking about a variety of topics, from our lives to our dreams and experiences. He told me stories from his youth, talked about the places he had visited and even shared some life advice. Little by little, I felt like we were becoming closer, building a friendship that I never would have imagined. That week, in addition to exploring Paris, I discovered Jake's human and caring side. His presence was essential for me to enjoy the trip safely and happily, and that relationship that until then had been distant turned into a stronger bond full of complicity. We spent the entire day exploring the surroundings, getting to know new places and appreciating every detail that the city had to offer. In the middle of the afternoon, we ventured out on a long and challenging trail, but breathtaking with incredible landscapes. We walked for hours, losing track of time between conversations and laughter. When the sun began to set, exhaustion began to set in, but we couldn't stop admiring the beauty around us. At the end of the day, exhausted, I could barely take another step. When we arrived at the hotel, I almost collapsed on the couch and let out a sigh of relief with a tired smile. I looked at Jake and joked, "Wow, Jake, I'm exhausted. The tour was incredible, but my feet are killing me." He laughed, sitting down next to me and relaxing on the couch. "It was incredible, but I'm just as tired as you," he said. "Let's rest so we can enjoy it again tomorrow. Do you want me to give you a foot massage?" Surprised by the offer, I smiled in disbelief. "Would you do that for me?" "Of course," he replied, with a calm and pleased smile. I laughed, knowing that it would be crazy to refuse a massage after such a long day. So I said that I did want the massage and that I wasn't crazy enough to refuse a foot massage after walking all day. Then, Jake began to massage my feet firmly with his strong hands, relieving the tension that had accumulated throughout the day. The massage was incredibly relaxing, and with each touch I felt the exhaustion disappear and be replaced by a strange mix of relaxation and sensations. The pressure of his hands seemed almost instinctive, and to my surprise I noticed an unexpected desire beginning to emerge. Scared by the direction of my thoughts, I quickly made up an excuse. "Thanks, Jake, I think I'll take a shower." Standing up with a forced smile, I thanked him again and walked quickly to the bathroom, trying to organize my mind while the hot water from the shower fell over me. I reflected on what I had felt, trying to understand the mixed emotions that had arisen. It wasn't something I had expected, but perhaps it was the effect of being in such a different environment where everything seemed new and intense. The next day, we woke up, with everything planned. Our schedule was full and we made the most of each activity, visiting a few more tourist attractions and taking photos of places we hadn't seen yet. Surprisingly, it was still early when we finished, feeling that we had some free time and decided to treat ourselves to dinner at an elegant restaurant to end the day on a high note. When we arrived at the restaurant, the atmosphere was welcoming and sophisticated, with a calm atmosphere that made the moment even more special. Jake, excited, suggested that we order a bottle of wine to go with dinner. I agreed, and while we waited for the food, we drank and talked about life. When we got back to the hotel, when we got in the elevator, we were laughing at one of the stories he had just told. When we went to press the button for the floor of the hotel room, our hands met. I felt a shiver and he looked at me with a different look that took me by surprise. It was an intense look, full of something that I didn't know if it was the influence of the wine or a connection that had been growing throughout the trip. The elevator was silent, and for a moment neither of us said a word. But I could feel the energy in the air, a tension. We remained still in silence, our eyes meeting as the elevator went up, and my heart raced with the closeness and mystery of that moment. As soon as we entered the room, the atmosphere seemed to have changed, as if every detail around us indicated that that night would be special. I felt my desire grow more and more, and everything led me to want to be with Jake. The intensity of the moments we had shared, the care he showed me, and the attention in the small gestures made me want to be even closer, and perhaps it was nothing more than an unexpected and fleeting connection, but at that moment, that no longer mattered to me. I knew only that I wanted to live the moment without hesitation. I then decided to start my own game of seduction, leaving signs so that he would notice my interest. The feeling was mutual, but I expected him to take the initiative. In a casual tone of voice, I said that I was going to take a shower because I was very tired and needed to relax. I went into the bathroom and left the door a little open, the hot water running down, relaxing my muscles and letting my thoughts drift away. When I finished, I realized that I had forgotten to grab the towel, and, taking advantage of the opportunity, I called Jake to give me the towel because I had forgotten. I saw his footsteps approaching, and soon he was at the bathroom door with the towel in his hand. I opened the door enough for him to see part of my legs. When I grabbed the towel, I let my hand slide lightly down his arm, feeling the firmness of his skin against mine. I looked at him, and with an insinuating smile, I thanked him. Jake smiled, and with a sparkle in his eyes, he replied with a tone full of intentions that whenever I needed him, he would be there to support me. His gaze remained on me for a few seconds, and the atmosphere seemed electric. I felt my heart beat faster and the desire that had been awakened intensified, creating an atmosphere of anticipation between us. At that moment, without words, we knew that we were on the same page. Before continuing with our story, subscribe to the channel, like it and activate notifications to receive alerts for our videos. After getting out of the shower, I wrapped myself in a towel and went straight to the bedroom, while Jake occupied the bathroom. I knew that he always came by my room at night to wish me good night, and that was when the idea came to me that I could pretend to be asleep, leaving the towel strategically positioned so that he would see just enough to arouse his desire. It was a bold plan, but at that moment the idea of provoking him gave me an inexplicable adrenaline rush. As soon as I heard the shower turn off, I knew it was time to put the plan into action. I lay down on the bed, adjusting the towel so that it was loose in the right areas, revealing just enough to spark Jake's imagination. My heart was racing, but I kept my expression serene as if I were asleep. Soon, I heard his soft footsteps down the hallway and my heart skipped a beat when I realized he had entered the room. He started to say goodnight, but his voice stopped mid-sentence. I knew he had seen me, and from the sudden silence I could already imagine what he was feeling. He stood still for a moment until I felt the bed dip slightly as he sat down next to me. I continued to pretend to be asleep, but I could feel the intensity of his presence. His deep, irregular breathing as his eyes roamed over every detail of what was exposed. It was as if desire hung in the air, creating a silent and electrifying tension that made me increasingly involved and wet. The silence and proximity only increased the atmosphere between us, and I felt that he was as overcome by desire as I was. Unable to resist that moment, it was then that I felt his hand slide gently over my body as if he were testing the limits between us, and each touch made my heart race. The sensation was intense and the desire I already felt grew stronger, taking over me. With each movement with his touches, my breathing became heavier and I knew he felt the same. Calmly, I turned to the side, letting him understand that I was there, ready for him. Jake lay down next to me and made everything disappear in my body. I could feel every inch of him, every movement he made. I screamed with desire. I was already crazy, but I wanted to feel his pleasure. At the same moment he did, I said, "Release all that jet for me." As soon as I spoke, it seemed like he was just waiting for me to say it. When I finished the sentence, I felt all the liquid fill my body. We made love intensely and passionately, without words, just letting our gestures speak for us. At that moment, all that mattered was the moment we were living. It was as if the world around us had disappeared. It was just him and me, connected in a night that would remain forever in our memories. As soon as our moment came to an end, he got up from the bed with a soft smile, looking at me, with an amused sparkle in his eyes. He then completed the sentence that had been interrupted earlier. It was the good night he had come to say to me. He then said that he hoped to wish me good night like that more often. His words hung in the air, loaded with a meaning that only the two of us understood. Before leaving the room, Jake gave me one last look full of complicity. I lay there, remembering what had just happened, and an involuntary smile appeared on my face. It had never crossed my mind that something like this could happen between Jake and me, but at the same time, it was such an intense and unexpected experience that I felt complete, as if something inside me had been awakened. The trip that had already been wonderful was now unforgettable. That night, that secret and unexpected moment seemed to have given even more meaning to everything we had experienced in the last few days. I didn't know what the future would bring, but I knew that this trip would be marked forever in my memory, like a unique and addictive chapter. The days that followed our trip brought a strange mix of nostalgia and desire. Every time I saw Jake, a wave of memories invaded my thoughts, as if my mind insisted on reliving every detail of those intense nights. It was difficult to look at him without imagining his touches, his words, and the moments we shared. The dynamics at home changed subtly but perceptibly. Our daily interactions, once so casual, now carried a subtext. Quick glances, hidden smiles, light touches that seemed accidental but that we both knew were intentional. It all created a dangerous game, a tension that made the atmosphere both exciting and suffocating. One night, while we were having dinner, my mother commented on how much calmer and happier Jake seemed to be lately. He laughed, looking away from me for a brief second, and said that the trip to London had been a wonderful experience and that it had made him see life with new eyes. I just smiled, trying to hide the blush that was rising to my face. After dinner, he called me to talk to him in the office, something he rarely did. My heart raced. As soon as I entered, he closed the door behind us and approached, keeping his voice low. "Natalie, we have to be careful. Your mother," he trailed off, seeming to struggle with his own thoughts. "I know, Jake. I don't want any of this to hurt her." But, my words hung in the air, because before I could continue, he moved even closer. "But what I feel for you is not something I can simply ignore," he whispered, his eyes fixed on mine. For a moment, the weight of the circumstances seemed to disappear. He touched my face gently, as if he wanted to memorize every detail. The silence was broken by the sound of the front door opening, announcing my mother's return, and we quickly pulled away. That moment was a reminder of how delicate our situation was. Every movement, every word, carried enormous risk, but it was also impossible to ignore what we felt. The days passed, and we became masters of disguise. We kept up appearances in public, but when we were alone, everything came back with full force. The nights were more intense, more risky, and each encounter felt like an explosion of emotions that could not be contained. I knew this could not last forever, but deep down, I also did not want it to end. Jake was a mix of danger and passion, something I had never experienced before, and that attracted me in an almost irresistible way. One afternoon, while my mother was busy at work, he asked me to get away. He said he wanted to take me to a special place. Reluctantly, but curious, I accepted. We got in the car and drove to a secluded cabin, surrounded by lush landscape. "No one can find us here," he said, holding my hand as he led me inside. We spent the entire afternoon together. He gave me his tool in every way, I drank his liquid a few times, and it was all wonderful and incredible. He filled me completely, and you know I'm saying that because it was everywhere. What happened in that place was even more intense than anything we had ever experienced before. There, without the shadow of judgment or fear, we gave ourselves completely to each other, as if the world had ceased to exist. But at the same time, reality always seemed to find us. With each moment together, the weight of the consequences hung over us, reminding us that we were playing with fire. The days that followed that afternoon in the cabin were a mixture of euphoria and tension. On the one hand, each encounter with Jake made me feel alive in a way I had never experienced before. On the other, the weight of the consequences and the constant risk of being discovered seemed to increase with each moment. Jake, always so confident, began to show signs of restlessness. He seemed more cautious, less willing to risk moments alone with me at home. This only increased my anxiety, because each message I received from him was a mixture of relief and expectation, as if he were waiting for the last time. One night, while we were sitting in the living room with my mother, Jake's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and stood up, saying he had to take an urgent call. His expression was serious, but there was something else there, a nervousness he couldn't hide. After a few minutes, he came back into the living room with a distant, almost worried look in his eyes. My mother, distracted by a TV show, didn't notice, but I knew something was wrong. When he caught my eye, I knew the call had something to do with us. Later that day, he quietly called me into the kitchen. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. "Things are getting complicated, Natalie." "What happened?" I asked, trying to stay calm, even though my heart was racing. "Someone saw us that afternoon at the cabin. I got an anonymous call, a threat." My entire body went cold. "A threat? What did they say?" "That if we continue, they'll tell your mother everything." I don't know who it was, but the person seemed to know a lot. I felt like the ground was opening up beneath my feet. The possibility of my mother finding out what was going on was something I had never really considered, and now it felt like a real and imminent threat. "What are we going to do?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. "We need to be more careful. We can't meet in public or leave any clues. And most of all, we need to decide how far we're willing to go. His words were like a knife, cutting through the veil of illusion I had created for us. As much as I wanted to believe that we could continue living this secret romance, the reality was harsh and inescapable. Over the next few days, our interactions became colder, almost distant. Jake seemed to be pulling away, perhaps trying to protect me and himself. But I missed him, his presence, his intensity. It was then that, one silent night, I received a text from him. Just one sentence. Meet me tomorrow at the same cabin. We need to settle this once and for all. My heart raced. I didn't know what to expect, but I knew I couldn't ignore that request. The next morning, I found an excuse to leave the house and went to our secret place. When I arrived, Jake was already there, sitting at the table, with an expression that mixed determination and sadness. He stood up when he saw me, and without saying a word, pulled me into a tight hug. Natalie, I never wanted it to come to this. But, we can't go on like this. What are you saying? I asked, my voice shaking. I'm saying we need to put an end to this, before someone gets really hurt. My legs weakened, and I leaned against the nearest chair. I don't want to lose you. Neither do I. But continuing this would be selfish of me. I love you, but I also love your mother, and she doesn't deserve this. The words came out like a blow, and although I knew he was right, accepting them felt like tearing a piece of myself away. We spent hours talking, reminiscing, trying to find solace in the fact that even though our time together was ending, it had been real and intense. When I left the cabin that day, I knew my life would never be the same. What we had had was brief, but it had scarred my soul in a way I could never forget. And although the pain of saying goodbye was almost unbearable, a part of me knew it was the right thing to do. Subscribe to the channel for more spicy stories.